What's up, y'all? It's your girl Amanda, and we are back with another episode of Mandy's Entertainment Reviews. So, for this episode, we are reviewing Little Richard, I Am Everything. So, this documentary about Little Richard, it is on HBO Max, and it was released a couple years ago, probably around early the year, mid year. I don't know, but it was released in 2023. So, what do I think about this documentary? It's a great documentary. I just hate the fact that, Little Richard had to hide behind who he was, behind religion. Um, he wasn't open, basically. He wasn't open with who he was. So, as you guys know, I do my documentaries in KWL. Know, want to know, and learn. See, at your big age, you should know that. So, let's get started with what I know. Little Richard is a famous flamboyant singer. He knew James Brown in the early days of his career. So if you guys remember watching Get On Up, and that one guy who was in, I think he was in like a Disney movie, he played Little Richard. And he was basically playing Little Richard as like a restaurant worker, and he was complaining about how he was being treated. He had hits like Tutti Frutti, Tutti Frutti, oh Rudy, Tutti Frutti, oh Rudy, woo, Tutti Frutti. So yeah, that song. Then he's from Georgia. He was on Martin and Full House in the 90s. So he played like a mouse exterminator on Martin. Remember, Gina had a mouse in her apartment and she called the exterminator, and Little Richard was on there. He started playing like the piano and singing and stuff. I think that was like probably in season 1 or 2 or whatever. And then in Full House, he played like a relative to Denise, Journey Smollett's character. And lastly, he found religion towards the end of his life and just kind of denounced everything he stood for. Like he was on TLN or something, and he, was talking about getting right with God and all that stuff. I don't watch TLN, but it was a clip that surfaced around the internet right before he passed away. So what do I want to know more about his upbringing in Georgia? Any romantic relationships? What were his parents like? Did he invest his money? What was his friendship interactions like with James Brown? Again, I did mention the Get On Up movie, but that's a movie. Like, what about in real life? Did he work with any artists that the younger generation would know? And lastly, how much of his life did the church take up? So now we are on what to know. Um, what I learned is that he is a crazy, wild, talented piano player. Like, he's all over the place. Like, anybody who plays the piano and is all over the place is all right with me because you feel the music in your soul. You know what I mean? Um, I did put originator of take your shirt off, twist it around your head, and spin it like a helicopter because they were showing some footage. Little Richard was on stage. He took off his shirt. He just started spinning it around. So I guess they've been doing that in concerts. I said he is from Georgia. I always thought it was Athens, but he's from Macon, Georgia. He grew up hearing blues in the streets, so this was during the time in the South. A lot of poor people were walking around. They had harmonicas to play music, a lot of singing, a lot of, makeshift instruments and stuff like that. He had 12 siblings. Back in those days, parents had a lot of kids. He used to bang on the piano as a child, but in my defense, I think that's how you learn how to play a piano until you get like proper training. His father was a minister, but check this, y'all. He owned a small nightclub and owned a bootleg house. How you a minister? You own a nightclub and a bootleg house. But it was to keep food on the table for them because they grew up in the South. He attended Baptist and AME church. Now, I'm familiar with the Baptist church. I'm not familiar with AME church. My mother and my grandmother and her whole side of the family, they're all Baptist. I actually grew up going to both African Catholic church and Baptist church. And then, like, the reason why I say African Baptist is because it's similar to the Baptist church: live music, live preaching, dancing, a lot of black figurines around the church. So that line was just always blurred to me. And my dad is like Roman Catholic. So when I started going to like real Roman Catholic church, it was stiff and quiet and, and all that stuff. I didn't understand that. But going to African Catholic Church, it was like going to Baptist church. He was born with deformities, uneven arms and legs, but that didn't, stop him from, his talents and living his life. His father was homophobic and his mother was a sweetheart. So I hate to say this, but it doesn't surprise me when I learned that, because his father is a minister. And back in those days, especially in the South, the minister was head on about the Bible. You got to live by the Bible. You know what I mean? So that didn't surprise me when I learned that. He was a part of the Chitlin circuit, like the other black talent during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Little Richard performed in drag. Now, that I did not know that performers were in drag during like the old days. I thought like performing in drag started in the 80s, but it was going on back in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So I learned that. He recorded his first song in a radio station lobby. A lot of things in the music business was makeshift. It was makeshift. Now, back in my generation, like the 90s R&B and hip hop, they go to Daddy's house, the big recording studio in New York City. This recording in a radio station lobby was just new to me. I know James Brown had a recording studio, but in a radio station lobby, really? That's insane. But eventually his father did come around and start supporting his music. He even played it in the nightclub he owned. So I thought that was a nice turnaround. Let's see. His father was killed by Little Richard's best friend. So they didn't really go into detail about that. They just said, oh, his father was killed by Little Richard's best friend. And then they moved on to the next part of the documentary. His demo was a live recording in 1955, which I thought live recordings were rare, but I guess not. I have live recording of a James Brown concert, and I even thought that was rare, but I guess recording live music and stuff was normal back then. The record company wanted him to sound like Ray Charles and B.B. King. Now, I like Ray Charles's music. I'm not a big fan of B.B. King, but you could kind of tell like the distinct difference between both artists. And being an artist, isn't that about individuality anyway? Right? Tutti Frutti is about anal sex, but it was too lewd or too, out there to be played on the radio. So Dorothy LeBoustre rewrote it to be appropriate. See, yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, the only person in my generation of music to do something like that was Britney, If You Seek Amy. And I thought that was like the first time, but hearing Tutti Frutti was like that, I was like, oh, okay. That makes sense. It was later covered by Pat Boone. I don't know who Pat Boone is really, but they played that version on there and it was dry, super dry. But Elvis and Pat Boone sold more records of Tutti Frutti than Richard did, and that's messed up. So Little Richard started making a little change, and guess what? He moved his family to Riverside, California. So Riverside, it's about like 40 minutes outside of LA. I want to say it's in San Bernardino County. I could be wrong. I'm not from California, but it's not in LA. It's outside of LA. Little Richard says, my music broke down segregation. Now, I believe, yes, that is true, but I want to also say that Little Richard is one of the musical artists that broke down segregation, not just him alone. Little Richard made explicit music, obviously, because of Tutti Frutti. He was arrested for having long hair and singing black music. Again, the 60s, the 50s, and 60s were a weird time. Because what? Arrested for long hair and black music. He was in the movies in the 1950s. If you're young and listening, yes, there were movies in the 1950s. They didn't really play movies on TV like that all the time, but there were movies and people went to the movie theater. He met Lee Angel when Lee Angel was 16 and she asked her to marry, and he asked her to marry him. I don't know why he would ask a 16-year-old girl to marry him, but the laws were different back then, I guess. He quit singing and found God in the late 50s. That's the first time. It was a situation where I guess he was on the plane and he claimed he saw an angel or something, and then someone else confirmed it was the Sputnik incident, whatever. So after he found God, he enrolled in the Oakwood College Seven Day Adventist College. Adventist, did I say that right? I don't know. But he also changed his image, so he like kind of cleaned up. And he also covered Precious Lord Take My Hand. Now, I only heard one version my whole life, and that's by Mahalia Jackson, until he made a cover of it, I guess. And it sounds cool, doesn't sound as scary. Because gospel music, like old gospel music to me, sounds very scary, but his version didn't sound too scary. He married Ernestine Penniman and described him as a loving, positive husband, which was very nice for her to say. But he needed money, so he started performing again in 1962. And that's when they go into the part where Little Richard talked about taking the Beatles, Paul, Ringo, John, and Harrison. Harrison? I think that's his name. Took him to the club in Germany. He told that story. I also found out his organist was Billy Preston. I know some Billy Preston music. My dad has some Billy Preston music. I grew up listening to Billy Preston. And also Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones opened for Little Richard. Yes, the Mick Jagger. And he ended up divorcing Ernestine and going fully back into Little Richard mode. Also, where did Shut Up come from? Because everyone knows that Little Richard does say shut up a lot. It comes from him not being up to the Vegas standards, performing with a suit and tie. And when I heard him say that, I immediately, because I don't know, in a lot of documentaries I hear this, I immediately think about George Carlin and how he just did not feel comfortable performing in suit and ties when he did comedy in the 70s. Or not in, the 60s and 70s in suit and ties on the Vegas Strip. So I kind of compared it to that. Also, Little Richard was into drugs. His drug of choice was PCP, cocaine, and heroin. And then after he lost his brother, which was a mystery, he went back to the church and started selling Bibles. Now, when you sell anything as a job, on commission, I guess he didn't make no money. It always happens that way. He boycotted his record label. He's received no Grammys. Another thing I didn't know is that Jimi Hendrix played for Little Richard. Later down the line, they talked about how his career resurged in a way. He got new management. He did rock and roll version of his gospel. He, was generous with money. He paid for people's education, rent, all that stuff. He was in a car accident and missed his Hall of Fame ceremony. Well, yeah, he missed the ceremony because he was in a car accident. The 1989 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, this video I do see a lot on Twitter, and people always be laughing at him and stuff. But someone in the documentary said that they were laughing at him and not with him. So, yeah. And by the time after the whole American Music Merit Award, that's when they went into him and reverting back to religion. And he called people to tell him to get right with God. And then he ended up passing away in 2020. So, yeah, this documentary was sad in some way. Not bizarre, but just sad that Little Richard is full of life and fun and humor and all that stuff. He could not really be him because he was, I guess, bound to religion, if you will. Mandy Stars. I never gave it a Mandy Stars. I will definitely give it a 4 out of 5. What I liked about the documentary is that they played Lucille Bogan's music. And if you guys don't know who Lucille Bogan is, if you be on Twitter or TikTok or I don't know, Instagram, and you hear this song about this lady and nipples and all that stuff from like the 1940s. That's Lucille Bogan. So they've been making X-rated music, so we don't have to worry about these new artists because it's been happening since the 40s. Um, I love seeing Little Richard be his authentic self. I love seeing that. Like, he didn't have to hide behind religion and stuff. He was being himself. Seeing Sir Tom Jones, and he's getting up there in age, but I don't know if he still performs. Is not unusual. And did y'all know that Tom Jones had a song with DJ Battlecat? Well, he's not featured on it, but he produced it. Bet y'all didn't know that. And it's called I Don't Think So. I think it came out in like 94, 95, 96, like somewhere in the 90s. And when he was at the 1989 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for Otis Redding, he said, "Shut up, make my picture." Basically, he was saying, shut up and take my picture. What I disliked is just that he couldn't tell his story himself. Again, this documentary came out in 2023, I'm sorry. It came out in 2023, and he died in 2020. I cannot think. He died in 2020, so yeah, he couldn't tell the story himself. Some of the reenactments were just a little too animated. I just wish there was like some sort of archive footage or something, but the reenactments was just too animated. I was confused about his father's death and his brother's death. They didn't really go into detail about what happened to them, but we do know that they both passed away. And lastly, the reminder of the rock and roll hate that goes around, you can't listen to rock and roll, you'll go to hell, and blah, 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 which I always thought was so weird. So yeah, this is the episode of the Little Richard I Am Everything review. You can catch that documentary on HBO Max, and I think it's like an hour and 40 minutes long, but it is a good documentary, and I hope you get a chance to check it out. And that is the end of Mandy's Entertainment Reviews, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.